This is the Fear and Greed Saturday edition, a look at some of the most memorable stories of the week. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Morning, Michael.
Sean, our Saturday show every week is all about the two of us nominating what we think is the biggest story of the week, the most remarkable, the sleeper story, and our favourite story. And then we basically see if we can agree on a winner. And generally we can't because we are fairly competitive.
Yeah,
so let's get straight into it. We'll start with the biggest story. What did you think that was this week?
Well, I think markets was the biggest story of the week. There was some really big moves in share prices, a couple of really significant points. Iron ore prices went back through $100 a tonne. That's great for BHP, Rio Tinto and Fortescue in particular. Fortescue had a massive week. It was up more than 15% just in the last 5 days. Pretty incredible. Then Jerome Powell was reappointed as the Fed chair. Now, who cares? Well, we do, because investors read that as a greater likelihood that US interest rates will rise next year, and tech stocks were sold off really hard. They came back a bit, but locally, the likes of Afterpay, Xero and WiseTech Global had a really, really volatile week. The banks have really come off. Now, this is sort of a 2-week story, not just a 1-week story. Commonwealth Bank is off more than 10% in less than a fortnight. That's about $20 billion in value. While most analysts expect equity markets will continue to rally, people are saying that, the spectre of inflation and higher interest rates is really tempering the enthusiasm, and in the ASX case, it's really struggling to make much headway. So, given we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars and huge volatility in share markets, clearly that's the biggest story of the week.
Well, you've actually been quite clever about the way you've done this, because by saying markets, that then covers everything from the local markets to Wall Street and everything associated with it. So it's quite cunning, really. Well done.
Well, I will go equity markets. Okay, that's a fair call. I'm hedging my bets here because I reckon you've got a good one. I'll go equity markets.
All right. Well, I think I do have a good one, and I'm going to narrow it right down. I'm talking about crypto, specifically cryptocurrency. I'm not broadening it out beyond that. It is just what's happened with crypto this week and the way it has split the financial services sector. Really, like you, it's kind of a 2-week story. It's because it started about a week and a half ago, this division, when the RBA finally weighed in on the debate, warning households about fads like crypto and saying private digital currency like Bitcoin and the rest could be undermined if central banks started their own. Commonwealth Bank CEO Matt Comyn has spoken about it twice in the last week or so. The first one was at the end of last week, where he was responding to the Reserve Bank comments. And in that, he actually said that the bigger risk was in missing out. But this week, he then issued his own warning, saying people speculating on crypto do open themselves up to major risks. So it seems like he is going both ways on this one a little bit. Then the super funds can't agree. Australian Super says crypto doesn't generate an income stream, so it's not a suitable super investment. On the other hand, Host Plus says crypto is simply too big to ignore. Then you've got the Financial Services Minister, Jane Hume, saying that Australia as a country could miss out on opportunities if we're too afraid of new technology. Then the chair of ASIC jumped into, saying there's extraordinary consumer and investor demand, but, surprise, surprise, great caution is needed. And he did say something that we talk about all the time, that investors shouldn't invest in things they don't understand. Then, as if that's not already the biggest story, you add in India moving to ban trading in private crypto like Bitcoin, just as China has already done. And India is now talking about starting their own digital currency. And I think you have the unbeatable biggest story of the week.
I concede.
Excellent.
I hate saying that.
Thank you. That is 1-0. This is a good week for me. What is the most remarkable story for you?
Well, mine was where younger investors put their money, and it's not in the big stocks on the ASX that you might think about. Data from National Australia Bank shows that new and younger investors are putting their money into green assets, like electric vehicle companies, green hydrogen and renewable energy groups. Tesla is now just outside the top 10 most held stocks on NabTrade across all markets. We're talking about a company that is based in the US being just outside the top 10 held companies. So if you put the banks in and the miners and the retailers and all those people, Tesla comes in at about a number 11 for younger investors in this country. I think that's just extraordinary. A couple of things from this. One, Green isn't just trendy anymore, it's actually a sensible investment strategy, and young investors know it. And 2, investing overseas is becoming normal, mostly because it's much easier than a few years ago. The Australian Prudential Regulation released figures this week that show the super sector is now worth $3.4 trillion with a T. They also show that $3 of every $10 invested in super is in overseas share markets. Quite incredible. For investors, the world is a much, much bigger place and options abound. It's quite remarkable how much local money is now invested offshore.
Sean, I reckon you won this one the moment you mentioned that Tesla stat. That is amazing that it is just outside the top 10 most held stocks.
Yeah.
That's quite incredible. It's barely even worth me nominating a story, but I'm going to anyway.
No, go on.
Because I still have a bit of faith that I might be able to convince you. For me, the most remarkable story was actually an international one, and it's about global wealth tripling over the past 2 decades. It was from some research done by McKinsey & Co., the consultants. They say total global wealth is now $514 trillion. Unsurprisingly, 2/3 of the wealth is in property, which is split pretty evenly between land on one side and then houses, buildings on the other. Australia made the top 10, which again makes sense when you consider property prices here. But the biggest shift, and the thing that I think makes this really interesting, was the change at the top, the fact that China has now overtaken the US. It does seem, Sean, like we spend a lot of time talking about growth in wealth and value, from house prices to the rise, the absolutely meteoric rise of companies like Amazon, Tesla, Facebook, the people associated with them, just because of the amount of money involved in this. $514 trillion being global wealth now. I think that's remarkable. But even as I say it, you know what? That Tesla stat is still the most remarkable story of the week. So 1-1.
Okay, I would just make a little comment about your remarkable story, Michael. I think it's remarkable that Australia is a top 10 country in that. It really shows the value of the housing market, which is sort of $9 or $10 trillion in Australia. It's about 3 times the level of superannuation. The fact that Australia is a top 10 country is quite remarkable. Anyway.
Well, thank you for helping me out there and kind of trying to edge it back my way, but I'll still let you have that one. 1-1. Sleeper story this week, Sean. What story for you is flying under the radar?
Well, it's hard to say that one of the biggest corporate takeovers of the year is a sleeper story, but I'm going to. Private equity giant Blackstone has made a third bid for Crown Resorts. We know that. They've offered about $8.5 billion. Now, James Packer owns about 37% of the company. That means his stake at that valuation is worth about $3.1 billion. He has been very, very quiet on what he's going to do. There were reports that Blackstone had approached him directly. Of course they would have. They're trying to buy the company and he owns 37% of it. So what's the sleeper part of the story? I reckon James Packer will sell. Crown's become a really difficult project for him. He clearly loves the gaming industry. He's made a lot of money from it. He's good at it. But like his father, Kerry, who famously sold his great love, Channel 9, to Alan Bond, it's a financial decision for Mr. Packer. Now, James Packer must sell down his holding of Crown Resorts to less than 5% within 3 to 5 years. That was a recommendation of the Victorian Royal Commission. So he has to do something. Blackstone is giving him a way out. The question, is the price right? I'd say it's pretty close. So my sleeper is that James Packer will sell out of Crown Resorts.
Oh, that's a very good one. And if it does play out that way, then you heard it here first. The sleeper story, though, for me is one that you actually mentioned midway through the week, and it's about some stats released by the Bureau of Statistics this week. And they're about renewable energy generation. So this relates back to the 2020 financial year. And really the headline piece of information from this is that solar, wind, and hydro contributed 222 petajoules to the domestic energy market. Now, 222 petajoules doesn't actually mean that much to me, but it becomes a heck of a lot more significant when you realize that 222 petajoules is enough to power 10 million homes for a year. And you did make the point, Sean, at the time that household use is only part of the demand for energy and that the industrial demands are huge, but still, for me, this is the sleeper story of the week because I don't think people realize just how much power is already being generated by renewable sources in this country. I certainly didn't. And clearly you can take from this that momentum, if it was already at this point in the 2020 financial year, it is growing.
Yes, I agree. I'm happy to concede that one because mine is more of a forecast than a sleeper story. I think you can have that one. I think the challenge in some ways with the whole power story, it's as much transmission and storage as it is generation. Like, we're pretty good at generating it, but having the poles and the wires to actually transfer all that green energy and battery packs to store it and that, I think that's, in a way, the hard part of this. So I'm just convincing myself that you have actually won this round. You're right. It is amazing that we generate enough green power to power 10 million homes for a year. Yeah, you win.
Well, I'll tell you what, in a few weeks' time or a few months' time, if James Packer does end up selling, then we can retrospectively award it to you. But for now, I'm claiming it.
Fair enough.
Favourite story this week, what was it for you?
Well, look, I've got to go to COVID this week. Good news all round, at least in Australia. New South Wales, Victoria and the ACT are now beyond 90% vaccination rates. Once New South Wales hits 95%, or on December 15, whichever comes first, face masks will only be needed on public transport and at airports and on planes. The 1 person per 2 square metre rule will be scrapped and QR check-ins will only be required for higher risk venues like hospitals and churches and aged care facilities. Hairdressers, of course. Why don't they say barbers? I don't know, hairdressers. Anyway, proof of vaccination won't be needed for most activities. I know it's in a New South Wales story, but it actually provides a roadmap for the other states as well. Even Queensland is now trying to fast-track vaccinations in hopes to hit 90% by early January. That's about the time when all these things should filter across most of the country. So early January really is a time to look forward to. Right at the beginning, many experts said it would take 2 years of coronavirus before things started to get back to normal. We're almost there. 260 million cases later globally, 5.2 million deaths later, we might just be heading back to normal. Fingers crossed. Now, having said that, the outbreak in Europe at the moment and the new variant in South Africa is definitely a cause for concern. But I'm a half glass full man, Michael. That's my favourite story of the week.
Yeah, it's a good one. How about this, though? And I realise now I shouldn't have accused you of cheating with your first story today by grouping a bunch of things in together, because I'm actually combining 2 stories myself for my favourite. But both of them are out of China, and they're both relating to unusual or fairly extreme policies. The first one is pretty serious, and that's the decision that is seeing the crew of Chinese ships being placed into quarantine for 7 weeks once they return to China. It's part of the government's really extreme focus on preventing the spread of COVID, other limits as well for foreign crews as well. But 7 weeks in quarantine does mean that there's a shortage of crew members for ships. So really, what's that mean for us? It means preparing for delivery times to keep blowing out and shelves to remain empty for some time. The other story out of China is a little bit less serious unless you happen to be a celebrity.
I'm interested.
Yes, the Cyberspace Administration of China is cracking down on what they call fan circle chaos. In short, it basically just means limits on how many times celebrities and their products can appear on websites, limits on discussion of their daily lives, a ban on unofficial online fan groups, all that kind of thing. All I can say, Sean, is that you are lucky you are not in China. Otherwise, the Sean Aylmer Appreciation Society would be fairly short-lived, it seems.
Well, and it's doing so well in Australia at the moment. So, yes, I am very lucky. You can have that one. They are great stories. Some of the rules that come out of Beijing, and, I'm sure there is good intentions behind them, and perhaps it's lost in cultural translation, so we have to be wary of that. But stories like that are quite amusing. I think you can have that one. 3-1. You win today, Michael.
Oh, thank you very much, Sean. This has been a good week. Just a reminder as well that we've had some great interviews this week, everything from tech founders to professional investors, some really interesting chats. If you want to listen to any of those or indeed to any of the shows over the past week, they're all available on your favourite podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Enjoy your Saturday, Michael.
And don't forget that tomorrow, Sean and I will both be back with Adam Lang from the Fear and Greed team to have a bit of a lighter look at some of the news around the place. I'm Michael Thompson. Have a good Saturday and a great weekend.